Hi, welcome to Still Evolving, where we explore the truth behind lasting high performance and resilience. Rather than relying on perfection or superhuman ability, our conversation will highlight how real strength emerges through simple, intentional habits grounded in self compassion, adaptability, and the ability to grow through life's inevitable setbacks. Today, we are so fortunate to kick off the conversation with Dr. Alex Auerbach. Dr. Alex is a performance psychologist and certified executive coach who is a national leader working with athletes, executive leaders, and teams. He is founder and CEO of Momentum Labs and serves as an advisor to startup teams and is a performance psychologist serving teams in the NBA and NFL. Dr. Alex, welcome.
Dr. Amy, thanks for having me. What a fun full circle moment this is for us.
So awesome. I'm so grateful for you and your willingness to jump in on this conversation. We've talked a little bit about still evolving, but really the intent is to share relatable journeys, highlighting how elite performers, leaders have just that evolved and continue in a process filled with reflection, connection. And so we wanted to start off by asking you to share a bit of your journey or the evolution and the motivations that have fueled it. So if you can share a little bit about your adventures.
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me. I guess to give you the Cliff Notes version, I've had a pretty winding career path. I started as a college football coach, and that journey really started in high school. Like I did my senior project in high school about coaching football, and I was like dead set on becoming a football coach. That was sort of mission one. And for me, the inspiration behind that was the opportunity to impact a bunch of people, lead a team, and I like competing, and being around sport and the energy of sport. And so that was super motivating for me. And so I picked where I went to undergrad based on the only program that would let me work with the football team, and then did an internship in the NFL and got a couple opportunities during college, and then graduated, took a full-time coaching job and hated it. Burned out pretty hard. The lifestyle of coaching is a grind. And as an undergrad student, I wasn't really exposed to that. And I think once I saw kind of behind the curtain, if you will, I was like, oh, this isn't exactly the way I think I'd want to spend my time for lots of reasons. And so went on a bit of like a soul searching journey there. I sold newspaper ads, I rented tuxedos, I went back to school, I looked at working at a D3 school. And then I eventually ended up getting another internship with an NFL team that kind of became like a last hurrah. Like, let me see if this is what I really want to do. Maybe it was a bad environment and I just need to find different people. But it turned out that that was wrong. And so once I left that second NFL internship and was clear that this wasn't the way I wanted to spend my time, I went to a career counselor. And after, 6 or so sessions with him was sort of like, I think I want to do what you do. And he's like, oh, you could do what I do, but you could do it in sports. And it was sort of this light bulb moment that went off. And from there, the rest is history, as they say. So I ended up interning with a sports psychologist back at the university at home, went and did my grad program at North Texas, which is a pretty good grad school in our world, and then came back to University of Arizona, worked with you, and then eventually left Arizona to join the Raptors and now with the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I have had some like ups and downs in between there too. Obviously, we can talk some about leaving the Raptors for sure, but that was another point of evolution where I thought I was going to go down one kind of different career path and ended up figuring out that maybe that wasn't going to be as fulfilling as I had projected and needed to find my way back into the stuff that I really loved. And now I'm lucky that I'm doing that again.
That is awesome. And very grateful to be part of that journey more recently, I guess. So thank you. I'm curious about when you have had those setbacks along the way, what lessons or tools helped you to keep moving forward along the way, whether it was that kind of career discovery piece or you alluded to the challenge that you faced when you realized maybe the path in the Raptors organization maybe wasn't the kind of as fulfilling roles. If you could just kind of share what helped you.
I think thematically for me, probably the thing I do best in those situations is reach out to a bunch of different people for help. I think one of my strengths is that I'm able to like hear a bunch of different opinions without overly weighting any one opinion and can kind of synthesize information for myself. And so, in each major transition point, I haven't been shy at all about reaching out and getting other people's perspective. I really don't think that I can know all that I need to know to make those decisions. And so reaching out to people like you or other friends who have like a different set of lived experiences, right, and different wisdom to pull on, I think is really useful. And it's also quite remarkable what having good friends can do for you, right? What people around you can do to sort of keep you going when things are really challenging. So that's one thing I've relied on really at every point where I've made a big decision. And, it just depends on what the decision is, but reaching out for help, I think, is super useful. I talked about going to a career counselor, so I found that to be helpful. And I see that as sort of an extension of social support. And then the other thing that I think I've done a lot, I guess two other things that come to mind. One is I really lean into learning when I'm going through a big transition. Like it's something I feel like I can control, that motivates me, that gets me excited, that helps me feel like I'm getting better at something, which is a feeling I need to have when I'm going through a major change. Like I just want to find progress somewhere. And so that's a point where I feel like I can experience some of that, even if the other things in my life that are maybe not moving forward in the way that I want are still happening. Like I can at least control that I can, reach a new level of mastery when things are pretty challenging. And then I do a lot of like reflective journaling or thinking, depending on how you look at it. But just writing down like what's going on in my head and trying to synthesize the themes across time. Yeah, I've been using Chat GPT for that most recently, and it's like pretty remarkable what it can do. And so I find like externalizing some of that beyond just talking to people is also quite helpful for me.
Super cool. I'm wondering if we could lean in a little bit on the Chat GPT. I'm constantly like reading right now and learning on how to maximize that tool or something like it for whether that's content creation or whether that's like you were using it as like a self-help tool, kind of reflective journaling. Is there your favorite prompt or a query that you found like, dang, that was good. Like that was really helpful?
I could tell you how I set it up because it sort of like automatically prompts me. So in
Okay.
ChatGPT or Claude or any of the AI systems at this point, you can build like a project or a folder. And so what I did was I uploaded a bunch of therapy books into the project. And then I gave it very specific instructions to act not like a therapist, but like a guide, and to guide me through reflective journaling questions. And then I asked it to pull from internal family systems, and I asked it to pull from ACT and process based therapy and CBT. And then, I described Carl Rogers a little bit and told it to be sort of like Rogerian in approach. And then basically said, like, ask me a random question from one of these frameworks every day at this time. And it will automatically prompt me to answer a question. And it's just a random question, but it does a great job over time of synthesizing back to things like core values. So one of the early things it did was ask me, what values guide my life. And I wrote about the ideas of like, for me, it's excellence and love and joy. And so I wrote about those in the journal, and then it comes back to them now with other questions. And it says like, oh, you talked about this here. Here's how this is showing up in your current situation, even if it asked me a question from say like internal family systems. So that's kind of how I've set it up. And then at the end of every 2 weeks or so, I ask it to do two things. I ask it to repeat back to me the major themes I've written about in the last couple of weeks. And then I ask it to give me any non-obvious insights into myself based on what I've written. And it comes up with some pretty remarkable things. Like probably the most powerful insight was, as for sure true for me, I tend to frame all negative emotions as like something bad is happening, right? So for example, like I was missing my kids and I turn that into like, oh, I must be a bad dad, And ChatGPT is like, no, it's not that you're a bad dad. It's like, this is a sign of the connection that you have. And so missing your kids might be a signal that like things are good and that you actually have a high quality relationship. If you didn't love your kids, you probably wouldn't miss them. And I was like, oh, that's a really good reframe, ChatGPT. Thank you. And so, insights like that I think are really pretty cool. And it's done that for several things that I found to be super helpful.
Super cool. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to give it a shot. I've used it in terms of like providing recommended questions, like what am I missing here? And it will kind of like, have you thought about X, Y, and Z, or ask X, Y, and Z. But I love how it is synthesizing your journal entries over time. And then, like I said, powerful insights. Like you don't know what you don't know. So
Yeah,
super
it's pretty
cool.
awesome. Would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I'm gonna check that out. You mentioned connection, but I also wanted to talk for a minute about another core fundamental, if you will, of evolving, and that is our mindset and how we're making sense of the world around us. Perhaps it impacts how we even make sense of our own reactions. Like you just mentioned the example around the missing your kids, right? And how you made sense of that emotion was one way, but perhaps there was another way that you could make sense of that reaction. What about for you? Have you noticed in that how mindset shifts have played a role in your evolution?
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me has probably been this sort of like maturing of my mindset over time. I think is probably the most notable thing, right? Like, I think when I was young, I sort of felt like invincible a little bit, right? And like, oh, I can do anything, and I'll sleep when I'm dead, and all those kinds of things that are pithy coaching sayings. And for a while, I was like, oh, that's kind of true. And then all of a sudden, like, I was totally burned out because I wasn't sleeping and I wasn't exercising and I wasn't doing any of the foundational things that keep me functioning as a person. And so having that insight, like, and the mindset really that like the most important thing I can do is take care of my well-being if I want to be great at what I do, right? So that was a big shift from say like age 22 to 24, where all of a sudden like my priorities changed as a function of believing that that was going to help me be successful. So I think that's been a big one. I think kind of along the same vein has been thinking differently about sleep and recovery broadly. I know you're big into sleep, but like, there is, especially in sports, as you know, so much said about like, while you're sleeping, the enemy's working, these kinds of nonsensical things that drive how people show up. And so I had some of that, right? And I had problems with sleeping. And so I think like a second major shift was seeing recovery and sleep as like investment in future performance, right? It's not time away from whatever I'm working on. It's time that I'm putting toward whatever's most important tomorrow. So I think that was a really helpful mindset shift. And then I think probably third was really like getting more attuned with my full experience. I think as a man, you get socialized to sort of suppress or reject or dismiss your own emotional experience. There's like a real, premium placed on things like stoicism or the absence of emotion and being steady. And it's nuanced. I think there is some value in some of those things. But I think the reality is like the conditioning for most men, I think leads to a point where you just don't really talk much about how you feel. And honestly, you don't really know much of what you're feeling at all, which leads to a pretty like grayed out world. And I was lucky that I sort of like my baseline is probably like one or two levels above cheerful as a person. But, I still needed to figure out like, what do these feelings mean? And how do I use these feelings in a way that helps me? And so I think the third one was really about like seeing my emotion as more helpful, learning to see it as information and stuff that would be beneficial for me to experience and would help me connect better with other people. And it certainly made my life richer. So I think I've come a really long way in at least those three dimensions.
Super cool. With regards to the connection, I often talk about connection as our agent of change. And you've mentioned about the power of relationships in your life to either help garner a perspective that maybe you were blinded to in the moment, or be there as kind of like that support that we all kind of long for, that sense of belonging and kind of you've got this, right? When times are hard, or celebrating those wins along the way. But I'm just curious about in other ways you see relationships as helping you adapt when you have those setbacks or, adverse life events that kind of punch us in the gut for a bit.
I think for me, what relationships do is give me a perspective I'd never be able to get on my own that I can then try to make sense of and integrate into my own way of thinking and maybe make sense of things slightly differently. In some ways, I almost view it as like reading a book. Like when you read a book, you take something that someone's known deeply for like 30 years and put into 200 pages. And you probably don't get everything, but like you get the core of it. And there's a lot of really good data in there. And I think relationships can be quite similar. Like if you have a problem, so I've gone through some like pretty major personal transitions recently in a separation. And, I've reached out to people like you and said like, this is my experience, what do you think about that? And you have, 30 years of your own life experience dealing with difficult relationships and other things, whether it's work or personal, and you have your own stuff that you've read and you're much more well-read than I am. And then you can draw on that and you can sort of share that with me. And then I can say like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. Or that's a data point that I wouldn't have come across myself. And like, how do I make sense of that? And does that resonate for me? Or does that help me feel differently about the experience that I'm having? Or does it allow me to see it in a new light? And I think for me, once I have clarity on whatever it is I'm struggling with, it's much easier for me to sort of move forward. But I think when I'm like just in the starting point, everything feels really overwhelming, right? It's almost like starting a big work project where you just like have no idea where to begin. I think solving big life problems is quite similar. And so in a way, the relationships like, color in a few of the puzzle pieces and provide a different perspective and allow you to kind of get started. And then I think for me, that gives me a lot of hope. Like once I start to move forward, I start to feel more hopeful and optimistic. And then I can get myself to a point where like, okay, I'm gonna be okay.
Such a grounded source of strength, that experience of hope to keep us moving. That's awesome. I know you shared a phenomenal ChatGPT journal tip, but I'm just curious, are there any other actionable tips that listeners could put into practice today as they are evolving in their own journeys?
Yeah, lots of them. I mean, where to begin? I think, if I were gonna advocate for, like, a few things, I think the first would be mindfulness. I'm a pretty big believer that it's like I sort of view it as like a pivot point if you think about basketball where you can kinda, like, move in all the directions on your pivot foot, like, mindfulness gives you a bunch of different things that you can use just by being a little bit more aware of how you're feeling or what your values are, or whether you're activated or under aroused or whatever it might be, both as a person and a performer. And getting used to like separate yourself from your thinking, I think is pretty helpful. So that would be one that I'd recommend. And as you know, there's such good data on it now that it's
Yeah.
like pretty overwhelming as a helpful tool. So I think that would be one I'd encourage people to leverage as they're still evolving. I think, we've talked about connection and relationships, but I think finding people that believe you're capable of more than you believe you're capable of is a good way to push yourself to still evolve. And
Yeah.
so like trying to surround yourself with talented people or people who share similar values or want like the same things for you, but see more in what's possible for you than you might, I think is a really cool way to build, like whether that's a mentor or family member or parent, whatever it might be, but is a good way to keep evolving and pushing yourself. Yeah. And then I think, if I were to give like one more thing, I guess I'd talk about goals, right? Like I think everyone will ask you like in a work setting, what's your 5-year plan? And I think 5-year plans are like kind of silly, but I think having a 3-month goal is probably pretty good, right? And like what you're working toward and where you're trying to get can be quite useful. And I think you can take a little bit more control and have a little bit more agency over your evolution if you've got a clear goal and something you're working on.
Love it. You mentioned sleep and focusing on wellness as a foundation for performance. So before we wrap up, though, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, do you have a favorite recovery habit or routine that kind of helps not just ground you, but really sustain responding and showing up in the way that you most desire, whether that's in your personal world or in your professional world?
The sort of non-negotiable for me beyond sleep, let's set that one aside, is exercise. As you know, right? Like whether it's running or lifting weights is really good for your cognition, it's good for your memory, it's good for your motion regulation, it's good for energy management, it's good for all sorts of things. But like it's pretty hard to be, running outside for an hour or something like that for me personally. I mean, so that's the one that as soon as that one goes, I know things are kind of going off the rails for me. And so I've really done a good job of keeping an eye on that. And so for me, it's a like non-negotiable 60 to 75 minutes in the gym every morning so that if nothing else goes well that day, I know I made progress on something.
I love it. Thank you. Such powerful reminders and then also just innovative new strategies. I love always our conversations because I feel every time I learn something new and you did not disappoint again today. So thank you very much. Appreciate you and being a small sliver in that Dr. Alex journey and hope that there's more adventures to come. So thank you again.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.